I read an article in one of the Sunday papers coming up with some pretty horrific lines like body fat on the bottom of the cremator after the process had been taken through. Yeah?
Yeah, no. There's always horror stories in every industry. However, most of them come down to sheer incompetence on part of the operator. So in regards to that particular article, there was two slants. The first up, it's coming from a very American perspective, and rightly or wrongly, the American funeral industry is exactly that. It's a gigantic behemoth of an industry. It's dominated by about three big players, and they are essentially multinational corporations. They have massive infrastructure, they have a way of doing things, they have boards of directors and shareholders, and they are a juggernaut. And in many situations, the service that they offer to families is prescribed. And as a result of that, there's going to be some pushback from not only within the industry, from the smaller players, but also from families who feel that they're not actually getting their needs met, largely because they're not listened to. They're presented with some form of package, and the package is often highly priced, and it requires a number of things that in New Zealand we'd find odd. I'll give you for instance, because my wife is Canadian, and a friend who rang me up last year, and his father had passed away from cancer, and he recounted his experience with the cemeteries. Now, a lot of the cemeteries in Canada are not publicly owned like we are here. They're privately owned, and so they're businesses. And he went and asked to get a price for a plot for his parents. He wanted a side-by-side plot, and for them to be buried. And this is in Winnipeg, so middle of nowhere, essentially. It's a long way from anywhere, and they've got a lot of land in Winnipeg. It's a very, very big province that Manitoba's part of. Long story short, they came up with a quote of $48,000 to bury to his parents. And that wasn't the funeral cost. That was just to... And he rang her, he said, is this normal? And I said, well, you better tell me what they're talking about. And long list of things like a concrete liner inside the grave, essentially like the old style septic tanks, I guess, a concrete liner inside the grave to preserve the integrity of the grave. The coffins were $12,000 each. The maintenance fee was something like $5,000 to mow the grass in perpetuity. The list goes on. And the graves themselves were, I think they were something around about $10,000 or $11,000 just for the plot. Compared to New Zealand, the same equivalent in New Zealand would have been probably totaling around about $3,000 in Christchurch altogether. But the point is that when you have large commercial, industrial style service providers, then they justify their existence and they create things that historically may have had some basis somewhere. For example, we cannot bury double depth in the cemetery at Rangiora. As the water table is too high, it's inappropriate to do so, and so you can't have, like all the other Christchurch cemeteries, we can dig the grave essentially as deep as we need to, and that's a cost saving for families. So there are certain situations where the context is important, but where this whole article was going from is that you can't avoid the fact that when somebody dies, there's two parts to it. There is the grieving family who have lost someone they love. Then there is the people who need to deal with the dead body. And that is the factor that most people don't like dealing with, and so that's why the funeral industry exists. One of the classic examples is there's a website in New Zealand that you can go to, and it's basically a do-it-yourself list of things that you need to do from a legal perspective to do your own funeral, or a funeral for a loved one. And you can work your way through the list, and at the end of it you can probably save yourself quite a bit of money because there's no professional company involved. However, there's an interesting link to a forum off that website where people recount their experiences of doing their own funeral, and well over 50% of those people hit a stumbling block, whether they find something they can't do from a practical perspective because they don't have the skills, or they don't want to do because it is an unpleasant activity that they hadn't thought through. And therein lies the essence of good funeral service, that there are things that we charge significant amounts of money for because no one else wants to do it. All right? There's that side of it. There are things that we do that are based on our long years of experience of avoiding families having an unpleasant episode. I can tell you, I've got a list of stories that of when people have tried to do it themselves and where things have gone wrong. And I look at it and I quietly sort of go, well, I could see that one coming a mile off, because you've never done it before and you don't know what a dead body does on day 2 or day 3, or you don't know when mum or dad is going to die, so what's the temperature going to be like? There's all sorts of issues. Not wanting embalming, that's a valid choice. But it also sends you down a different road, and a good funeral director will say, okay, sure, no embalming, that's great. Our time frame is now, we can't wait 3 weeks for Auntie Marge to come back from her river cruise in Europe to be at the funeral. That's the choice. No embalming, no problem, but the funeral will need to be within a prescribed time frame. And so it's very much, in New Zealand, all good funeral companies should be presenting families with choices, but also explaining the consequences of those choices, and then stepping back and allowing the family to make an intelligent decision. And that's what it's all about. We'll give you the information. There's nothing mysterious about what we do. There's nothing that I'm happy for anyone to poke around any aspect of my business. Come and have a look. I'll give you the grand tour, show you how we deal with people. I won't show you someone else's loved one.
No, understandable.
Understandable. But I will show you everything else we do, because there's nothing we're ashamed of. It's not.
You're not smoke and mirrors, are you?
No, we're not smoke and mirrors. We're a service provider that if we provide good service, you'll tell your friends and you'll use us again. If we provide rubbish service, then I don't have a business. And the disconnect between people lumping an entire industry into international bad practice, and let's face it, I'm not a big fan of the way the Americans do funerals. Like I said, I've dealt with 3 family funerals in Canada, and they have the same processes. Very expensive, and what they were charging for the same level of service that I was giving was 2 to 3 times as much, and I couldn't see the justification. But it still comes down to the fact is that grieving families aren't silly, but at the same time they are in a vulnerable position, because they often don't want to make hard decisions, or they're already dealing with other things in their life that are more important than that particular instance at that point in time. So a good funeral director is very much about presenting clear, simple information so people can process it and then make a good decision.
Alrighty, thank you very much indeed.